أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the Master of the Day of Judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts, the master of the Day of Judgment. And I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is His servant and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. It is said that in the days before he received revelation, the Prophet ﷺ would habitually seek to separate himself from the Meccan society. That on a regular basis, the beloved of Allah ﷺ, he would go to seek solitude so that he could contemplate upon his life in a cave that we know is the cave of Hira. And we know that on that one fateful day when the beloved of Allah ﷺ thinks that he is by himself, his solitude is disrupted by a massive creature of Allah Azza wa Jal, the angel Jibreel ﷺ. That he says that wherever I looked into the horizons, all I saw was this creature, all he saw was the angel Jibreel. And when the angel says to him, Iqra, read, coming with that initial revelation, the Prophet ﷺ, being a man of great strength, is able to respond despite the absurdity of the situation. Ma ana biqari, that I am not a reciter, I am not able to read. The entire interaction takes place thrice, and he is left alone. He is left alone on top of that mountain to make critical sense of everything that has transpired. He is left alone as he is walking down. The doubts begin to plague his mind. He is left alone as he is trying to understand everything that has just happened to him. And now when he needs someone more so than any other point in his life, now when he needs someone to be telling him that he is someone who is good, someone who will diminish these doubts that is in his head, the Prophet ﷺ, being one who is divinely guided by Allah Azza wa Jal, being prepped for this most crucial moment in his life, he is not met by any of his male companions. He is not met by Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman. He is not met by an Ali. May Allah Azza wa Jal be pleased with all of them. But when the Prophet ﷺ needs somebody more so than at any other point in his life, Allah Azza wa Jal puts into his hand the gentle hand of his wife Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. That you are a good man. You honor the rights of guests. You treat orphans with the respect that they deserve. Allah would not test you in this way where you would be possessed by demons. And this is the relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had with his wife. A source of support for one another, a means by which they could get through the tests and the trials of their day-to-day lives. This is what it meant to be a spouse according to our tradition. And for many of us, we find ourselves in a situation where the conversation about our marital ambitions and our marital pursuits, they become very confusing. That we don't know how in fact we can get to that point where we can find somebody who would embody those characteristics that the Prophet ﷺ and his wife Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha embodied when they were showing to us how a husband and a wife should be there for one another. We have an ideal, we have something that we construct as a value, but we don't know how to get to that point. And in pursuit of that ideal, perhaps to an extent that we make it something that is truly utopian and intangible in nature, but still it is something that we are struggling to get in the course of our lives, because we know that we want it, we know that we desire it, we know that it is something that we believe will make our hearts content, but we don't know how to get there. We don't know how to get to that point where we find that individual who will make us somebody who feels as if we are whole. We don't know how we can get to that point where we can understand critically and crucially a means by which we will find that significant other who will bring us benefit not only in this world but inshallah ta'ala into the next. And it becomes such a confusing process. Regardless of our age, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of our culture, regardless of our socioeconomic background, this thing of marriage becomes so confusing, and the pursuit of it is something that becomes even more confusing. How do I find someone to get married to? How do I go about doing it? Where does the permissibility stop and where does the impermissibility start? How do I get to a place where I appease my parents and do and be everything that they want to be while I still stay true to the things that I know will make me happy? How do I go about finding somebody in a manner in which that relationship that I will sustain will be one that will sustain me not only in the breaths that I take in this world, but will be something that will weigh heavy on my scales and benefit me when I stand in front of Allah Azza wa Jal on that day when I'm taken into account? And the processes that we see are those that are defined for us at a level of permissibility, but they don't equate to something that we would understand to be normative in our tradition. There are many ways of going about it, but there is not one specific way. The Prophet ﷺ, when he gets married to his wife Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, he is in her employ for many years. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, she sees this man as being somebody who espouses a certain character, a certain sense of virtue. He has a certain integrity about him. And so she, under her volition, says that I want to marry this man. She is a woman, and she has made a determination and decision for herself. She is not saying that I have to wait for the man to come speak to me. I have to wait for the man to seek out my hand. I have to sit here and wait for some individual who is male to come and say, will you marry me? But she sees somebody that she wants to be wed to. She sees somebody who will be of a benefit to her. She sees somebody who she will be able to create a healthy household with. Why is she going to wait? But it's one way that it can be done. And from that relationship we see that the Prophet ﷺ most assuredly benefits. Not only does he benefit, but the family that he begins to create in this world, they too benefit. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, a woman who is considered to be amongst the best women ever created according to our tradition, she has a mother who is the best of creation, and she has a mother who is amongst the best of creation, and so too her father is the best of creation. How then will she not be the woman that she is when she has this household that she is coming out of? But it makes sense because the two make sense together. And they get to the point where they can be together because Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha sees for herself that this is someone who would be good for me, and so she seeks him out. Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, when he finds himself in a situation where he wants to get married to this woman Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, he goes and he speaks to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That the tradition, it tells us that Ali radiallahu an, he is standing in front of the beloved of Allah alayhi salam, and he says, Ya Ali, what is it that you want from me? And Ali, he can't get it out, he is stammering, but the Prophet ﷺ, he says, perhaps you have come to ask me for Fatima. The marriage is something that moves forward, but what we understand, again, it is a different way of doing it. Ali makes a determination for himself as to what he wants, and he goes and he seeks it out. He makes a decision that this woman is going to be someone who is good for me so that I can exercise an air of my own critical thinking and understanding who would be good for me, and I will go and ask for her to be mine. And it works out for him as well. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, when it comes for the time of his daughter to get married, he wants the best for his daughter. He goes to Uthman radiallahu anhu, who does not respond to a positive with his proposal. He then goes to Abu Bakr, who does not say anything as well. Umar, he begins to become frustrated, and then the beloved of Allah alayhi salam comes and says, Ya Umar, will I be? He wants to marry his daughter. And Abu Bakr, he says that I knew that the Prophet alayhi salam was going to do this. Had he not, that I would have married her myself. But Umar is in a place where he wants the best for his child. He goes and he speaks to the best. He's not saying that I have a daughter, let her sit at home and wait for someone to come and ask of me. I will go actively out and seek somebody for her, because this is what I understand my responsibility to be. But again, it's a different way of doing it. He didn't do it the way that Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha did it. He didn't do it the way that Ali radiallahu ta'ala anha did it. The three instances are three that take different means, they take different paths, they take different methods to get to the point that they desire to be at. And we shouldn't put ourselves in a place where we understand that these are the only means by which we can actively find someone, or we recommend to those who are in our care or under our responsibility that this is the way that you do it. But at a much deeper level, we have to understand the way our sharee'ah works. It allows for us as very different individuals and very different peoples to approach things in very different ways, because we are coming from different backgrounds. And if we say that there is only one way of doing certain things, we confine ourselves to a very rigid understanding, and we make the sharee'ah, which is meant to be expansive and empowering, into something that is restrictive, and it does not give us that sense of vibrancy that is meant to give us. And it also causes many to become disenchanted with this religion of Islam, because we are telling them to do something that doesn't make sense for them to do. Permissibility does not equate to normativity within our law. Just because something is allowed doesn't mean that that is the only way that it is allowed to happen. And in this thing of our marriage pursuits, we have to understand it from this perspective. Because the Prophet ﷺ let his companions do it in many different ways. And so too, we have to be able to engage one another in a manner in which we are letting ourselves do this in many different ways. Because this thing becomes the epicenter of our communities. We don't have healthy homes. We find our families to be very unhappy. We are in situations where many find themselves in predicaments that could have been alleviated had they sought out a spouse or a companion that made sense for them. But rather they were confined to a rigid understanding of what they had to do, when essentially what was being told to them was obligatory upon them, was something that they were not obligated to do at all. Why do you have to get married to somebody who is from your country? Why do you have to get married to somebody who has a certain degree? Why do you have to get married to somebody who is from a specific background? You don't. And we can't say that we are obligated to, because Allah Azza wa Jal has not told us that we are obligated to. There are certain restrictions, there are certain guidelines, there are limitations that are there for us for our benefit. But we cannot arbitrarily begin to decide that something based off of our relative understanding of morality and ethics is now somehow equated to what is halal and what's haram. And there are so many ways of doing it, and that permissibility for us is because we are so different from one another. And it is not just that we are different because we come from different ethnic backgrounds or our origins are different. Even within our households, we have to understand that between the generations there exists an opportunity for different ways of pursuing it as well. So if my parents put me in a place where I was married in a certain manner, it doesn't mean that my child has to get married in the same way just because I went through it in that way. If I was allowed to be in a place where I made a determination as to who my spouse would be, this is something that the religion says I'm entitled to do. Just as much as it entitles me to be in a place where I can say, based off of my cultural norms, we will exercise an understanding that your marriage will be arranged, both are allowed. But because both are allowed, it doesn't mean that one is not. There are just different ways of doing it. And the one thing that we find explicitly in the hadith that is prohibited in this thing is the idea of a marriage that is forced. That in the Sunan of Abu Dawud rahimahullah, we find the hadith, we find the tradition that the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, he is given word of a young woman who is married against her will. And he speaks to this woman and he says that this marriage will be null and void if you don't want it to be taking place. Because you can't get them married without their consent. It is not allowed. It is not allowed. Forced marriage is something that is haram. When we try to understand this, we have to understand the deeper implications of it, because we are seeking to honor the objectives of a culture that should never supersede the objectives of our sharee'ah. We have to understand the broader reasons why we would be individuals who commit to another individual in this life to such a deep extent that we would say they are our husband or our wife. And when we force somebody to get into a relationship that doesn't make sense for them, we are just perpetuating cycles of misunderstanding in households that are not very healthy. We put our children into places where they're forced to succumb to circumstances that they should not be forced to succumb to. And because we don't have the connection to their subjective emotions and the pains that they experience beyond the time that we force them into those predicaments, we let it go as if we believe we have honored the rights and responsibilities that they have over us, when essentially we have not. Young women and young men on a daily basis find themselves in this situation where they are forced to acquiesce to a marriage contract that they do not want to be a part of, because they have a misconstrued understanding of what it means to be obedient to your parents. Islam does not say to you as a mother or a father that you are fully entitled to do what you will with your child's life. It is your child's life, not your own. And if you don't see the direct repercussions and ramifications of it, this is something that is problematic. A young woman comes to me pretty much every single week, every single day at times, with these kind of issues. Then my parents, they don't listen to me. My parents, they don't speak to me. They put me in a place where I went to a school, I went to a university, I came to them with an individual who would be good to me. They said, not only will you not be able to get married to this person, you have to get married to a person who is not only from our country, but from the specific village that is within our country. And if you don't do so, you are a bad person, you are dishonoring the rights that we have over you as parents, and you are doing something that surely you will cast sin upon yourself. And the child, wanting to not be someone who is disobedient to these parents, they find themselves in a place, I'm just going to do what I will. And they find themselves then in a place where they are not connected to the person who they are now sharing a bed with, who they will now be bringing children into the world with, who they look to as a means of support, a means who will be someone who will be there for them when no one else is there for them. They don't even know how to talk to one another. A young woman came to see me recently who was forced into a marriage by her parents, who had engaged in domestic abuse, emotional abuse, all kinds of abuse. This girl said that my parents, they sent me to a place that I did not want to be at. I did not want to be part of this contract. They said that you will be it because our honor is at stake. What we have in terms of what the people in our community will think of us, that is what is at stake. You will do it and you will enjoy doing it. And this young woman, she says that I was forced to be in this relationship for more than years, and every single night that my husband came and approached me in a physically intimate way, I felt as if this man was raping me, because I had no desire to be with him. I did not want to be there sharing that bed with him, and I wished I had said no when I had the opportunity to say no, and I wish they had listened to me every single time I had said no, and had not jumped when in my weakness I had said yes. Don't do that to your children. Don't set them up in that way. And if you are in a place where you are trying to understand your own marital pursuits, don't say yes to a marriage that you do not want to be a part of. You cannot sacrifice your happiness in that way. In the hadith, we have a woman by the name of Qayla bin Makhrama. This woman, she narrates hadith that we find in the book of Abu Dawood, rahimahullah. And this woman, she has a story that is associated with her, that when her husband passes away, she has several daughters who are not wed. And her husband's brother, he seeks to take seize of these young girls and get them married to people that he thinks they should get married to, not people that they want to marry on their own. And so this woman, Qayla, it is said that she takes her youngest daughter, she is able to grab her and run from the situation, and she goes and seeks out the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. And on her way to Medina, it is said that this man, her brother-in-law, begins to catch up to where she is. When she gets to the outskirts of the city, a struggle ensues, and he takes the child back with him so that he can do with her what he wants to do, get her married against her will. This woman, Qayla, it is said that she comes with a delegation into the city of Medina, and she goes into the masjid at the time of the Fajr prayer the next day. And as she sits, she is given the opportunity to speak to the Prophet ﷺ. And when the beloved of Allah ﷺ hears what has happened to her and what is happening to her daughters, he says that we should not oppress Qayla and her daughters and force them to get married against their will. Every faithful Muslim should help them in this cause. And a Muslim should do good deeds and not evil ones. What more do we want to hear? And what more do we want to understand? We cannot perpetuate these cycles that cast upon our community stereotypes and images that exist in very negative ways, because whether we are conscious of it or not, each and every one of us speaks for this religion of Islam. The manner in which we engage people, the precedent that we set for them, and aside from that, we have to think of the individuals whose lives we are setting up and playing with as if we don't really think that they have any worth, except that they are toys for us to do what we will with them. The Prophet ﷺ, his daughter Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, had a most unique relationship with him. Abiha, they called this woman Fatima Zahra, the mother of her father. They said that she mimicked him in all kinds of ways, that she embodied his characteristics. Most assuredly, they had a unique relationship, and they modeled for us the way a father should treat his offspring. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, Aisha sees her when on one occasion, and the Prophet ﷺ is whispering into her ear. And she sees that Fatima cries, and she sees that Fatima laughs, and Aisha says to her that what was it that the beloved of Allah ﷺ was saying to you? And Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, she says that my father, he said to me that he would be leaving from this world soon. And this brought tears to my eyes. And then he said to me that I would be from amongst the first who would join him again, and this made me smile. And Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, it is said that when she knows she is leaving from this world, in some of our narrations, she takes her own bed into her courtyard and she looks into the heavens with a smile on her face, because she will be reunited with her father once more. Would our daughters do that if they knew they would be with us again? Would our children find themselves in a similar situation based off of the way that we have treated them? If you are in a place where you find yourself in this predicament and you have the ability to say no, then say no. And if you are in a place where you have been forced into this situation and you are not able to remove yourself from it, when you have your own children, don't perpetuate the cycle. Don't let it continue on. Don't let it be something that keeps going. Forced marriages are not allowed in our religion. Both the husband, both the wife, both the groom and the bride, they have to be able to agree and consent to that contract. And if you do it against their will, you are doing something that most assuredly is impermissible in our tradition, in our religion, in our faith. And you are honoring the objectives of a culture that should not supersede the objectives of our sharee'ah, of our Islam, ever. Our lives were given to us. Even in pursuit of saying that we know what is best for somebody else, we can't justify it by saying that because we love you, we have the ability to do something that will hurt you. This is something that we have to let people decide for themselves. And if we don't do it, we are not honoring the rights that they have over us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us. May He bless us with knowledge that benefits us. May He bless us with the tawfiq to understand and implement that knowledge into our daily lives. And may He guide and bless us all. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.